You're 9 years old. You're sitting on a board above a moving coal chute in a building 10 stories tall and louder than anything you have ever heard. Your job is to reach into the coal flowing beneath you and pull out the rock. Your fingers are bleeding. They have been bleeding for 2 weeks. The dust in the air is thick enough to blur the boy beside you. The machine below your board has no guard. If you slip, nobody stops it. But you are listed on the payroll as 12. Nobody asked to verify that. If you are new to Steel and Sweat, this channel covers the machines and the men of American industrial history. The things that built the country and what those things cost. Subscribe and leave a comment below with the next story you want us to dig into. This is the history of the Breaker Boy, examined through the documents that recorded him. Lewis Hines Field Investigation Reports for the National Child Labor Committee, January 1911, in the Library of Congress. The Pennsylvania Bureau of Mines Inspection Reports from 1885 through 1900, held at the Pennsylvania State Archives and Penn State University libraries, which document 22 children killed by name, age, and machine position, the youngest of them 9 years old. The testimony of a breaker boy named John Casper, interviewed by a settlement house worker in Scranton in 1903, which is the clearest first-person account of a first day on the bench that the written record contains. In the caption cards, Lewis Hine attached to his photographs, which named the individual boys, documented their stated ages, noted the discrepancies he observed, and described what their faces looked like after a shift. But before we get to those documents, you need to understand what you are sitting on, because the machine and the building that contained it were designed around a specific set of economic requirements, and those requirements are why you are there. Anthracite coal comes out of the ground mixed with slate, rock, and bone, which is what miners call low-grade carbonized material that burns badly and ruins the product. The buyers knew the difference. City households burning anthracite in grates needed clean, uniformly sized product, or the fire burned wrong. Iron masters running blast furnaces needed consistent sizing, or the heat output dropped. You could not send raw anthracite to market. You had to process every ton of it, and there was a great deal of it. Over 95% of the Western Hemisphere's known anthracite supply sat in one narrow band of folded mountain terrain in northeastern Pennsylvania, across Luzerne, Lackawanna, Schuylkill, and Carbon counties. A building 10 stories tall, the processing machine built to handle the supply was the coal breaker. It sat on a controlled slope, so coal entered at the top and descended through gravity, stage by stage, through crushers that broke it, screens that sized it, and chutes that sorted it. By 1880, the breaker was the dominant structure of every anthracite colliery, towering over the surrounding patch towns like a black cathedral, audible from miles away. But the screens that sorted coal by size could not distinguish slate from anthracite by eye. Slate breaks into pieces the same size as good coal. The only way to remove it was by hand, by someone positioned along the chutes, examining each piece as it passed. Someone who could work in tight spaces, someone who could be paid very little, someone whose family's situation made the very little acceptable. That is why you are here. You are 9 years old, and this is your first week. A breaker boy named John Casper described his first day to a settlement house worker in Scranton in 1903. He said, "The slate cuts your fingers until they bleed, and the dust gets in your throat so you cough all winter. The boss hits you if you let slate go through. You learn fast. What you learn in those first days is the specific grammar of the bench. The coal chute runs beneath the board you are sitting on, not in front of you. You press your boots into the stream to slow it, damming the flow just long enough to sort a section, then releasing it to continue to the next boy downstream. Each piece must be examined. The slate is the same size as the anthracite. You learn to tell the difference by the weight, by the way the piece catches the light, by a tactile distinction that builds in your fingertips over weeks. What you cannot learn your way out of is the acid. The coal wash water contains a dilute sulfuric acid solution that runs continuously over the hands of anyone working the wet lines. It burns the slate cuts in your fingers. The cuts fill with coal dust. The dust stains them permanently black. A former breaker boy could be identified decades later by looking at his hands. In those first weeks, your fingers do not yet have it. In those first weeks, your fingers bleed on every piece. Lewis Hine entered the breakers of Luzerne County in January 1911, posing as a fire inspector, a postcard salesman, a man documenting factory machinery. What he was documenting was not the machinery. In his field notes from the Lackawanna breaker in Scranton, he wrote that boys ran when they saw him, were told not to talk to inspectors. The youngest he could document was approximately 9, and they were listed on the payroll as 12. The picker boss stands above your section of benches. He does not teach you the difference between coal and slate. You learn that yourself. What the picker boss teaches you is the pace. Lewis Hine's field notes describe him as a kind of slave driver. His instrument is a wooden stick. When your attention drifts, as it will by the 6th hour of 10, the stick corrects you. The boys who worked these buildings described the picker boss's approach as the one sound that could be heard clearly over the primary crushers, not the words, just the footsteps, then the contact. The primary crushers run at the top of the building. Their sound has been described by everyone who witnessed these buildings as some continuous thunder, the kind that enters through the bones rather than the ears. After your first few weeks, you communicate with the boys around you by gesture and lip reading. Nobody shouts over the crushers. You stop trying. The hearing you lose in the breaker does not come back. The boys who work these buildings for years arrive in their 20s with the hearing of men in their 50s. None of this is treated as a workplace injury. It is simply the sound of the building doing its job. The dust is coal dust, fine as flour, suspended in the air of the lower floors in concentrations that reduce visibility to a few feet in the middle of the day. Lewis Hine photographed the interior of the Pennsylvania breaker in South Pittston in January 1911 and wrote that the dust was so dense at times as to obscure the view. This dust penetrates the utmost recess of the boy's lungs. What this means medically is that the particles are small enough to pass the bronchial defenses and lodge in the alveolar tissue where the body cannot clear them. Boys who work the breaker for years cough black for hours after every shift. Men who worked breakers through their childhood arrive in their 20s with lungs that have already begun the slow scarring that will eventually cost them decades. The coal company's physician, if asked, will write down something else as the cause. What are you paid for this work? The answer is between 45 and 65 cents per day, with some accounts documenting figures as low as 45 cents. For that, you sit on a board above a moving machine with no guard for 10 hours, in a building where the noise will damage your hearing permanently and the dust will scar your lungs systematically, while a man with a stick monitors your production rate. But for families where the father has been injured underground or is sick or is dead, and fathers in the anthracite patch towns are injured and sick and dead at rates that make both events statistically ordinary, that 45 cents is not supplemental income. It is the margin between eating and not eating. The coal companies understood this perfectly. The desperation of the workforce was not a problem to be solved. It was a condition that kept the labor supply stable at the price they wanted to pay. If you are finding this history as important as anything we have covered on this channel, go ahead and hit subscribe right now and leave a comment below with the next story you want to see. But Pennsylvania passed a law in 1848 declaring a minimum working age of 12. What did it actually require? The answer is that it was not enforceable because it covered factories, not mines. So the most grueling child labor in the state was specifically exempted from the only law that might have addressed it. In 1885, following public pressure, Pennsylvania enacted a law setting the minimum age for breaker work at 12 and attaching an enforcement mechanism. The mechanism was the age blank, a certificate of age purchased from a mining inspector for a small fee, completed by the father with whatever age he chose. Pennsylvania had no compulsory birth registration law. There were no official records against which to verify the claim. The coal companies processed these certificates without question because the certificates protected them from legal liability and because they wanted the labor. The boys understood this system better than most adults admitted. The Pennsylvania Bureau of Mines inspection reports for the years 1885 through 1900 held at the Pennsylvania State Archives and available at Penn State University libraries. Document 22 children killed in or around the breakers by name, age, and position at the time of the accident. The youngest was 9 years old. The inspection reports are annual publications that include, for each fatal accident, the date, the name of the child, the colliery, the cause, and the age. They are careful official documents. They are also the minimum accounting. Historians who have studied these records consistently note that the documented deaths are severe undercounts of the actual toll, because small accidents that did not produce immediate fatality and accidents involving undocumented boys who were not on the official payroll at their actual age did not always produce complete records. 22 documented deaths is not the number who died. It is the number the system was willing to write down. The machine below your board has no guard. This is not an oversight. The coal chute is a functional component of the production process. Adding a guard would complicate the flow of coal and reduce the rate of production. The rate of production is what the company is paid for. If a boy slips into the chute, the machine does not stop. The machine runs on its own schedule. But what does a boy learn in this place over months and years? He learns the machine. He learns the specific sound the primary crushers make when a heat is running differently from normal. He learns which sections of the bench move too fast to manage properly and which can be worked. He develops the tactile distinction between coal and slate so deeply that it becomes reflex, the kind of knowledge that lives in the hands rather than the mind. He learns where the picker boss's footsteps are without looking up. He learns to eat during the 2-minute interval when the oiling happens because there is no other time. He learns to stop coughing conspicuously because conspicuous coughing draws attention, but he also learns the 2 whistles. Every boy in every breaker in every patch town learns the 2 whistles before he learns anything else. The regular whistle means a shift change. The accident whistle means someone is hurt or dead underground where his father works. When the accident whistle sounds, boys on the picking benches look up. The picker boss does not stop them from looking up. Even the picker boss knows what the accident whistle means. The Pennsylvania Bureau of Mines inspection reports document this world from the outside. Lewis Hines' photographs and field notes document it from as close as he could get before the boys ran. Sam Baloma, the smallest boy in the group Hine photographed at the Ewan Breaker in South Pittston in January 1911, told Hine he was 14. Hine's caption card notes that Sam did not appear to be 14, and that he had been working at the breaker for 2 years. Dennis McKee was 15 years old, 3 days past his birthday, when he fell into a coal car at the Lee Breaker in Chauncey, Pennsylvania on January 6, 1911, and was smothered to death. The coroner told Hine that the evidence suggested McKee had been working in another breaker before his 14th birthday. Nobody was charged or fined, and the breaker kept running the next morning. How did this system survive for more than 60 years? Because the men responsible for stopping it were the men profiting from it. Because poverty made the families complicit not by choice but by necessity. Because the state of Pennsylvania in 1868 placed enforcement authority over the mines in the hands of the coal operators. Because a boy hurt in a breaker was not a scandal. He was a statistic that frequently never got written down at all. The State Commissioner of Labor, asked to comment on the pattern of child injuries in the breakers in 1911, declared that mine accidents were the result of careless children who could not do a proper job and should be fired. That was the official position of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, not the coal companies, the government. But the moment that began to change, it was not a law. It was a photograph. Lewis Hines' photographs of the breaker boys, taken in January 1911 in Luzerne and Lackawanna counties, were printed in newspapers, displayed at public exhibitions across the country, and circulated to legislators and journalists and reform organizations. In each venue, they showed boys with faces black from coal dust looking directly into the camera. Not abstracted children, named children with documented ages and documented locations on documented dates. Sam Baloma, Pittston. The unnamed boys at the Ewan Breaker who pressed themselves together against the wall while Hines' camera faced them. The ones who ran when they saw him. The ones who had been told, not to talk to inspectors. Hine made the country see what the country had been choosing not to look at. Pennsylvania strengthened its child labor laws in the early 19-teens. Compulsory education laws gave families a structural alternative that the age blank had never provided. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 set national restrictions that closed the remaining gaps. By then, the economics were already shifting. Mechanical coal separators, available since the 1890s and resisted by operators who preferred cheaper human labor, were finally being adopted. The anthracite market was contracting as oil and natural gas replaced coal for home heating, and diesel locomotives replaced coal-burning engines. The economic forces that had created the market for a board, suspended above a moving coal chute with a 9-year-old boy sitting on it, were leaving the same way they had arrived, following the money. The record was never incomplete. A man with a camera made it impossible to look away from what the documents already confirmed. You are 9 years old and the machine has no guard. John Casper's testimony is in Scranton Settlement House Records, 1903. Hines' field notes and photographs are in the National Child Labor Committee collection at the Library of Congress. The Pennsylvania Bureau of Mines inspection reports are at the Pennsylvania State Archives. If this kind of history matters to you, subscribe to Steel and Sweat. Thanks for watching.